Hi, it's the Bella DeVera Foundation, and I was just talking about vulnerable, what that means. And the Wi Fi wasn't working, so I just wanted to finish my thoughts a little bit. So, I was saying at the end of the video when it cut off that if you are, if you have a coping mechanism in common with someone else and you're doing that with them, you're not crossing your own boundaries. If you are already in the practice of having certain coping mechanisms, whatever it is, I don't know, getting drunk or watching porn or whatever, if you were already in the practice of it yourself before you joined the other person doing that, you're not crossing your own boundaries because you didn't have that boundary in the first place. But if for some reason you weren't already in the practice of getting drunk and then you do with the other person, that isn't them crossing your boundary for you. That's you crossing your boundary. It's your responsibility. So you don't put that on the other person and you don't let them say, or you, well, they can say it all they want, but it's not true anyway. You don't agree with them to them owning your own boundaries for you. Now, if you want to know more about boundaries, you can watch my video, How to Trust Yourself to Be Around People, especially part 2, because I talk about boundaries in that video. You know, that's how to trust yourself to be around people, owning your own boundaries, not letting the other person own your own boundaries, and saying, you know, that's whenever you have like boundary issues, it's like save me or I'll save you kind of mentality. And I made a video about this, about that's when you I included it in my video on sex, on law of attraction. uh I forget the exact title, but I just made it the other day, so a date close to this one. uh I'll put it in the description if I can't think of it. But I was basically saying uh, whenever you think you're being saved from certain situations in life, you know, that's a save me mentality, or that's not going to happen to me mentality. So, anyway, you can watch that video too, because it's not just about the topic of sex, but it is a lot of it, because I wanted to explain that subject about that. But so, about being vulnerable though, whenever you're around people, you'll have to watch my part 1 of this, just called vulnerable, because that has what I already, you know, covered in this topic. I won't say it all again, but so watch that video, because it's important to know that whenever you're around people, like attracts like. It doesn't attract, I mean, there's opposites, like in astrology, two people relating to each other. Like my ascendant and sun sign is Leo and Aquarius. Those are opposite zodiac signs. Or like Aries and Libra or something, So whenever you're attracting opposites in that way, that's possible. But for a law of attraction, what it says, you know, you're not going to attract someone that is, like not like you. It's not how it works. So whenever someone, like I said in the first example, person A wants to say person B is vulnerable, if person A thinks person A is not vulnerable, I guarantee you person B isn't vulnerable. I guarantee you they're not. So that's the law of attraction. So, think about it a little bit, and let that sink in, what that all means. Don't stay in your little daydream bubble of being different from people and you having the upper hand on person B or whatever as person A, thinking they're going to be vulnerable and be a part of your coping mechanisms, because I guarantee you they're not vulnerable if you're not vulnerable, because like attracts like. But if you have, to a certain extent, you both could be, or to a certain extent, you might have low or weak boundaries or standards or whatever. And person B might to a certain extent too, because of law of attraction, but that's their own doing, not you doing that to them. But it doesn't always have to be exactly on the exact same level in every possible last way that there could ever be. You can have some differences. I have splotches on me, I don't know why. You can have differences between about the things that you have similar. It can be, like I could cross my boundary about this subject but not that subject, but you could about this subject and not that subject, something like that. In general, you can have like low kind of or weak boundaries or whatever, but it, it it's not going to be so much different, like night and day. But in some way it's going to be the same. But like I said in my other video, if person A thinks person B is going to be a part of their weak boundaries, it doesn't always necessarily mean they're going to be about what you want them to be about. They could be about something or another, maybe, but I said that person A probably has weak boundaries or whatever, and if they're thinking the certain way that I was talking about, I really think, you know, boundaries are a huge part of life, but that doesn't mean that person B is gonna be a part of your you crossing your own boundaries. Person B can cross their own boundaries and leave your boundaries yours, you know, but that doesn't mean they're going to do that about whatever you think they're going to do that about. And I I could just go on about this forever, but the fact that like attracts like doesn't always mean that someone's going to cross their boundaries because you want them to. You have something in common about something or a lot of things, but it doesn't have to mean that person B is going to cross their boundaries about certain coping mechanisms, like about sex or avoiding sex. Whenever you're using a coping mechanism about the topic of sex, you're avoiding sex. I put in several videos on that topic, so I won't go on about that, here, but I see this subject so much. It's like one of the coping mechanisms to have, because people like the topic. But then whenever you're doing the coping mechanism, you're avoiding the topic. So, hello. But anyway, so just because you might have boundary issues, and maybe person B does too, somewhat or somehow, doesn't mean they're going to about what you want them to do that about, like I keep saying. So don't call them vulnerable because you have boundary issues. It doesn't make them vulnerable because you have boundary issues, and it doesn't make them vulnerable, like what I said in the first part of this in the other video. The definition I gave to that for what I'm trying to talk about here. It's not what you're talking about when you call someone vulnerable. What you're talking about is you having weak boundaries. The other person doesn't have to in a certain way just because you want them to or because you have that yourself. You have some similarities, but it doesn't have to be about the same exact topics. So anyway, the other thing I wanted to say, whenever you have a certain personality about being vulnerable, you gotta let the other person and yourself have the personalities that you have. I have an offensive personality, not a defensive one. And they could be in certain zodiac signs too, or whatever. I don't know. Or aspects, and so forth. But I'll leave that for another video maybe. But whenever someone has, let's say person B has an offensive personality, don't call them defensive and say that they're gonna be vulnerable. You gotta actually look at what the person is like, be honest with yourself, accept what the person is like, you know. This is in my other videos on these topics, So you gotta be honest with yourself and accept what personality they actually have and not assign one to them that they don't have just so it suits your whatever you want at the moment, like a coping mechanism or a saves me kind of a thing or whatever it is, You can't fool yourself into thinking that they're gonna have a different personality when they don't. It's a waste of your time to say that they have a personality that they don't have. You can't all of a sudden, like overnight, change someone's personality, or doesn't happen. No one does that. If you're already engaging in your own coping mechanisms or have weak boundaries, then, or about certain topics or whatever, which, by the way, unconditional love is not a weak boundary. It's the only kind of love that there is that is healthy. It's compassion. So that's not a weak boundary or being vulnerable. Being vulnerable is so much different than that. But anyway, I don't know what I was saying exactly now, but you gotta let someone have whatever personality that they actually have and just accept it. Yeah, I think I was saying, whenever you're already engaged in your own coping mechanisms, and then person A comes along and thinks you're vulnerable, that's not you being vulnerable. You were already doing that. Or if you decide to try out a new coping mechanism with them, it's not them crossing your boundaries, it's you doing that to you. It's not vulnerable, like I said already. And that doesn't give you a defensive personality and an offensive one, or vice versa, however. You gotta let people have the personalities that they have, because otherwise you can't relate to people. It's like a one-sided, like, daydream that person A has. Is like, where did you ever come up with that? Like, life doesn't work that way. People don't work that way. People are not made to all of a sudden overnight just change into a different person because person A is around all of a sudden. It's not how life works. So you really gotta let people have the personalities that they have and quit trying to make them acknowledge your weak boundaries or your coping, whatever it is, because life just doesn't work that way. People aren't like that. People are made to heal their own selves or hurt their own selves. You can't change someone else's boundaries for them by having your own weak boundaries. But law of attraction in one person's life can keep happening where they're around people that have strong boundaries, you know? So if they start out having something in common with you, that doesn't mean that they can't, change their own law of attraction stuff or their own chakras, So anyway, that's basically what I wanted to say. But if I think of something else, I'll make another video on this. So leave comments and questions if you want to, and thanks for watching.